Hi there, and welcome to the reality show brought to you by the Ayn Rand Centre UK. Let me start by introducing our panelists. So, we're joined by Hollywood superstar and reality checker, Mark Pellegrino. And we're
Hey.
also, good to see you, Mark. And we're also joined by Kirk Wilcox, the comedian and satirist and Twitch sensation. How are you doing, Kirk? Good to see you.
Fantastic. Good morning, gentlemen, or good evening where you guys are, I guess.
Absolutely. Here in
Yeah.
London, it is evening. Yeah, sure. Well, today we're talking about Candice Owens and her way of dealing with anti-Semitism. In fact, later on, we're going to be talking about one of her videos where she introduces us to all of her Jewish friends as proof.
But before that, we are going to look at a very short clip from a show from Candice Owens, which she did, I think, about in November 23, when she caused a bit of a ruckus by posting a Twitter post saying something like, states shouldn't do genocides. That obviously created a bit of a storm on Twitter. So she decided to defend herself from any anti-Semitism accusation by inviting a Jewish comedian on a show and asking a few questions. And we'll see what happened for that. So producer, please produce.
My grandfather grew up in a segregated South. And so when I'm walking through Jerusalem and you see, and they say these are the Muslim quarters, this is where the Muslims are allowed to live, that doesn't feel like a bastion of freedom to me. So I guess.
Oh, I don't think it's where they're allowed to live in Jerusalem. I think it's that there's an Armenian quarter. It's not saying the Armenians can only live here. It's that there are communities, just like there's a Jewish community in Jersey here, and there's a Muslim community in here. I don't think,
Whoops. Well, Kirk, because before I come to you, I just would like to add, for fairness, that later on she kind of accepted that she might have made a mistake and misunderstood what she was told by her guide. But nevertheless, what do you think, Kirk?
Yeah, what you guys were saying earlier, the fact that she comes out and says stuff like, well, I'm just against genocide. She seems to be very good at finding intellectual shields to hide behind, rhetorical shields to hide behind. It's very similar to the Mott and Bailey tactic. And you see this a lot with when people discuss the Israel-Gaza conflict. They say stuff like, look, I'm just anti-war. I'm just against war. I'm just tired of seeing, these images of civilians and children suffering and dying. I'm not anti-Israel. I'm just anti-Zionism. I'm just anti-war. I think in another video I watched before coming on today, she was like going on and on about how what she really cares about is the fact that U.S. tax dollars are being sent over here. And that's what she chose to emphasize on. That's what she chose to laser focus on. And I think that's kind of what goes on here. You see across the Israeli discussion, the debate around it, is people find these rhetorical shields to hide behind, very similar to the Mott and Bailey tactic, where it's if they say something that sounds pretty bad, sounds pretty troubling, sounds like they might be against Israel in this conflict, then they'll run to the Mott and make much safer arguments to make, like, oh, I'm just anti-war and I don't want my tax dollars funding this war, funding Israel, when we have problems to take care of here in America, and I'm just America first. And why are we thinking about conflicts on the other side of the world when we here in America have our own problems to deal with?
Yeah, for sure. And there's a ton of issues there, and I'm sure we're going to be able to unpick them across the course of this episode. I think in this first clip we've just seen, obviously she's been to Jerusalem, she's been guided round, she's been shown stuff, she's had a chance to ask questions, she's then come back to America, she's met with her production team, she's written her questions for the episode, and still by that point she's retained the blind spot and the assumptions that it's the Jews that do the bad stuff. Is that really plausible, Mark, to have got that far and still hang on to such a whopper?
No, I've been to Jerusalem as well, and it never occurred to me that when I was walking, I went through the Lion's Gate, which is in the Muslim quarter, by the way, and never occurred to me that I was walking through a forced ghetto of Muslims. It never occurred to me that when I walk through Chinatown or Little Tokyo or Little Armenia or Little Ethiopia, that I'm walking through a ghetto specifically designated for those particular ethnicities, and that they're not allowed to go beyond that. In fact, when I arrived at the Lion's Gate, 50 or 60 Arab Muslims were coming out of the line, storming out of the Lion's Gate with a coffin over them. They were they were on their way to a Muslim funeral, which is a very interesting spectacle to witness from the outside. So they clearly broke the borders then. Yeah, so I can't help but think that, you know, if she had an Arab guide telling her that,
I think it was a
rabbi,
rabbi,
yeah,
yeah,
according to what she says in the other part of the interview, which is
that they're in the Muslim quarter because they're forced to be in the Muslim quarter. I was also told as we were driving by Jerusalem, you see water tanks atop atop many of the buildings, and they're in black, and they were showing me that those water tanks are the Arabs who own those, because the Israelis have control over the power and the water supply, so they have sort of an independent supply as well, just in case Israel decides to shut off the water and power. I didn't know what that meant. That was a bit of information that I haven't quite integrated or processed yet, other than, well, they're in disputed territory, and you know, it behoove the Israeli government to cut off terrorism in that way, as they did when they went to Gaza, to the displeasure of the international community.
Yeah, and of course, it's quite funny that she makes the point that because she thought she was in this oppressive quarter where the Muslims are not allowed to leave, she also said, well, I just found myself in this area, I realized it was dirtier, less well kept the rest of the areas I saw. It's like, yeah, because you thought they were oppressed, so you immediately assume that the fact that there's rubbish floating around is because of the oppression. Sorry, it's because that's the kind of way they lead. You know, that's the kind of culture you're facing in an era where the population represents a certain culture, and we see this in our town. So why should it be different in Jerusalem? And also, I can't remember, I forgot my point.
That's right. I was going to make a point about integration and ask Kirk a question, because one of the things that the Israeli comedian points out in the article is kind of what you've hinted at, Mark, as well, which is how integrated Arabs and Israelis are within Israel itself, how people work together in hospitals and in all sorts of fields without any kind of problem. So why is it that so many of the champions of integration here in the West seem unable to recognize that that level of integration exists within Israel itself? What do you reckon to that, Kirk?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I don't know if I have a good answer for that. Maybe it's just selective investigation. And again, you know, maybe there is some legitimate criticism to talk about when thinking about Israel and their government. But then it's like, why aren't we applying this same level of scrutiny to Gaza and regions run by Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis? And are those less integrated societies speaking? Do they have greater diversity, greater respect for the individual rights of Jews and women and apostates and secular types? From what I can tell, mostly no. And if there's a war between one of those civilizations in Gaza or one that's run by Hezbollah or the Houthis, and they're at war with Israel, isn't it time to really pick a side and determine which side is the better guys in this conflict?
Sure. Mark, what do you think?
Well, I don't know that that's the proper question, because at one time I would have said there were advocates for integration amongst liberals and leftists. Now they're advocates for disintegration. They don't like people together. They define people by characteristics that are beyond their control. And so you'd think that the separation of Muslim and Jew works out, you know, in their favor, in their moral interests. So it seems like on the one hand, they're applying they have a double standard. You know, they want the United States to be disintegrated. They want people to define themselves by characteristics that aren't in their control. They want these separate warring factions happening, and they're yet criticize Israel if those things are occurring, and if they're occurring voluntarily. I saw when I was there. I mean, I visited a place called Rambam Hospital in Haifa, where they have a whole wing devoted to treating Palestinian children who have incurable diseases or chronic diseases at the cost of these Israeli people. And I've thought about what the parents of those children must go through, back in Gaza or the West Bank, if they can even return to those places, because they would be considered collaborators for trying to save their children's lives and using a Jew to do it. And so it seems to me that if there is a type of segregation and an apartheid environment, it's coming from the Arabs who can't live on the same land with Jews. It's the Arabs who politically pressured the Israeli government to remove 8,000 people from Gaza. It's the Arabs who are complaining about settlers in the West Bank. I mean, that's the most despicable kind of redlining I've ever heard. And we had despicable redlining practices in the United States, but in the West Bank, it's awful. You can't live in a certain area because you're a Jew. That's the real apartheid that's going on. That's the real tribalism, and that's enforced by the Arab people.
Yeah, yeah. One of our members one of our YouTube members in the chat has raised a question, which I'd like to ask you both. So Kirk, first of all, he says, why do you have to pick a side if none of them represent a full respect for human rights?
Because it sounds like, trying to make perfect the enemy of good here. Like, yeah, there's maybe I could have framed that better when maybe I kind of trailed off on a tangent side, but yeah, it's what I think what I was trying to say was the fact that Candace is laser focusing when Israel's in a war with genocidal maniacs who are very interested in imposing theocracy on its on whichever territory it can get its hands on. And when they apply that, you see, as Mark alluded to, you see even greater apartheid in these regions. It's pretty telling that someone like Candace laser focuses on things that might be wrong with Israel when it's not entirely accurate, and doesn't really seem to apply that same level of scrutiny to regions governed by Hamas.
Yeah, yeah. Mark, what do you think? Why should we pick side, and which side do we pick?
If I use the standard of full respect for human rights, or I say individual rights, I don't like the concept human rights. I think it's part of the reason why rights are so diluted at the moment in people's minds. Then I would have absolutely no country to get behind, because no country has a full respect for individual rights. But one country has full respect for individual rights in principle, in written principle, in contract, as their governing charter, and that's America. And so in any conflict between America and another country, I would have to side with America, because in principle, its government respects individual rights. And it can go back to that, since it's written and enshrined as the soul of our country. I go to the National Archives and check out a copy of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, and there we have the principles that are the United States. And likewise with Israel, I can say that in principle, it respects democratic institutions, freedom of press, freedom of dissent, a relatively free franchise, and respect for individual rights and conscience in the form of freedom of religion. These are some of the pillars of democratic institutions that don't exist anywhere else in the Middle East at all, not even in nascent form. So the fact that they exist there, that I could be a gay man in Israel and walk the streets openly with my husband and not risk being murdered, which I cannot in Gaza, makes that a far more moral country than any other country in that region, and frankly entitles it, and only it, to the right of self-defense.
Yeah, yeah. Very well said. And that's actually a very easy thing to grasp, isn't it? That the country which has the best protection of individual rights, the country which protects individual rights in this particular case of Gaza versus Israel, there's only one of them that protects individual rights, and that's Israel. So that's a no-brainer. You stand behind the country which is more legitimate, in the sense that the only legitimate country is the country which protects individual. There's no point in having a country if its reason to being is this enslaving people. That's a totally illegitimate country. And yes, we live in a mixed economy where countries are half legitimate, half delegitimized by their own policies. But largely in the West, there is still freedom, there is still respect for individual rights. Yes, we would like it would be better. We would like a smaller state whose only job is to defend individuals and their rights. But until we get to the point, moving towards the direction is the good, is the best that you can hope for.
And that's why the religious defense of Israel is not the right one to make, for that exact reason. That is not what makes it the moral party in this conflict.
It's not about picking your tribe or picking your colors. It's about picking the principle behind the country.
And obviously that's something that Candice, I think, struggles with, because she's heavily tribe-oriented, as we'll get to, I think.
In fact, a couple of weeks ago, she did another video trying to make the point, given the boo-boo that she made, the snafu that came out of this interview. She decided to stress the fact she's not anti-Semite by trotting out a list of Jewish friends she had, people she grew up with, and how much she liked them. So, Mark, I'd like to ask you, he's saying that you had lots of dinners with Jews and you even dated one. Is that a good proof that you're not an anti-Semite?
No. I have to say, just like she would say, saying you have black friends isn't necessarily proof that you're not prejudiced against black people. In fact, it sounds very defensive. It sounds like she's trying to, manage a fire that she started. No, not the best defense in the world. What she has to do is come online with principled people who understand that, Israel is in the fight for its life, that it deserves to exist, that it will exist, and that it's not really this David and Goliath battle that everybody seems to be placing it in. The culture of the world seems to be enamored of the idea that the rich dominate the poor, and the poor have a de facto moral supremacy, and so they've placed the Israel-Palestine conflict into that conflict narrative, and they just make their judgments based on that. Well, what we try to do is break them out of that narrative. Because you're poor doesn't mean you got there because Israel was rich. It doesn't mean you were oppressed by Israel and can't get out from under their jackboot. You are likely poor because of your values and because of the values that your society has accepted. And how do we know that? Well, because they elected Hamas. And nobody's surrendering now. Nobody's rebelling against Hamas. Every time I see somebody saying it's time for Israel to start a ceasefire because they're just murdering people. Well, no, they're not. Why aren't you holding Hamas and the Palestinian parents of these children you're talking about responsible for their lives? For, first of all, endangering their lives and then continuing to endanger their lives by not surrendering or rebelling against Hamas. When are the Palestinian people responsible for their own fate? When is it not the rich and the powerful pulling all the strings? So yeah, her response is a defensive reaction, an attempt to, and it's such an overreaction, it makes me think that she is hiding something. And I also think that she's fallen into this narrative too. A lot of conservatives have fallen into this rich poor narrative. Some of them, like Tucker Carlson, are sounding no different than Marx in the way they talk. So yeah.
That's why I call him Tucker Karl Marxon.
And Kirk, do you have pictures of Jewish people in your wallet, just in case anyone needs some proof?
No, I actually do not at the moment. No, it's just I have one picture of me and a bunch of savings club cards of for different stores and establishments. One thing I want to say about Candace Owens is she has this tendency to entertain the arbitrary. She definitely has a tendency for arbitrary thinking. A couple years ago, she started a stir on Twitter by just asking, what's everyone's favorite conspiracy theory? A conspiracy theory that no matter what anyone says, no matter what anyone says you believe is true. Mine is that the moon landing in 1969 was completely faked. Just nothing makes sense about it, especially NASA accidentally erasing the original footage. So in other words, no amount of facts, evidence, or reasoning could ever convince Candace Owens that America landed on the moon in 1969. So a sense that I get is that reason is out for Candace Owens. And then she'll turn around. A few weeks ago, she said something like Hollywood was created by the CIA. I know Mark Pellegrino, you have a history in Hollywood. Maybe you could clear that up for us if I'm mistaken, whether or not Hollywood was created by the CIA. But on top of that, a few years ago, before this actually, I think back in like 2017, 2018, before she really blew up, she made a video for Prager University called Dear Celebrities, Nobody Cares What You Think About Politics. And she, went on and on about how no one cares what celebrities think about politics. And then not long after this, she finds out that Kanye West discovered her, agrees with her ideas. And then suddenly she was totally interested in Kanye West, one of the biggest celebrities in the world, getting heavily involved with politics and teaming up with her for any mutual causes that they might have. And on top of that, she one time, you want to talk about, Ayn Rand, she's talked about package deals in the past. Candace Owens back in 2019 tweeted, leftism, atheism, and narcissism are a packaged deal. And what I get from all of this, from just following Candace Owens over the years, is that reason is not her means of dealing with reality. And with all this anti-Semitism talk, I think it's easy to forget that a year even before the war broke out with Israel and Gaza in October of 2023, a year before that, when Kanye West was saying some alarming things about Jews, Candace Owens was one of the few people that rushed to his defense and tried to say stuff like, well, let's not rush to judgment. Do we know what he meant when he said he was going to go DEFCON 5 or whatever on the Jews? Just applying this very selective skepticism. In some aspects, she's willing to make harsh judgments of people. But overall, she just has this tendency to entertain the arbitrary. And I think that can only be a disaster when you are someone who is in the industry of distributing information and giving your opinion on things.
Just to add some clarity to the Hollywood issue, Hollywood was started in the early 1900s to get away from Thomas Edison in New Jersey. He had a lock on the film industry, basically a monopolistic lock on the film industry, and people wanted to get away from that so they could be free to film. And I think it just so happened that they stopped somewhere in Phoenix, Arizona, and that was going to be the original spot. It happened to be raining, so they stopped in Los Angeles, where it was bright and sunny, and they decided to make their home there, to be as far away from New Jersey as possible, and because it happened to be great weather. Also, an inconvenient truth is that this happened in the early 1900s, long before there was such a thing as the CIA. So Candace needs to do a little fact checking, and just a simple Wikipedia look. As flawed as Wikipedia is, she could find her way through that morass if she really wanted to in 5 minutes.
Yeah, but dude, the CIA would have hidden that fact, wouldn't they?
That's right. They would have. That's right. They didn't form from the OSS. They weren't a post-World War II phenomenon. They've been around for a long time.
This is the Ayn Rand Centre UK, where we're debunking conspiracy theories every day. Yesterday was debunking the Jewish laser in space theory. So check out that episode if you haven't seen it. Because who is it? Marjorie Taylor Greene?
That's right. Yeah.
Who's signed up to that one, I think. But one of the conspiracy theories that Candace herself seems to peddle in this video, even a bit later on, is when she's talking about DC Jews and making some distinction between them and her list of buddies who she's had Rosh Hashanah dinners with down the years, and making a claim, it would seem, that DC Jews are somehow the exploiters of the Jewish people who are trying to do it for power only, and trying to exploit their own kind in the same way. This is the comparison she makes that BLM does with Black people, in terms of trying to control them. Now, is that a bogus analogy to start with? Do you even know what DC Jews she's talking about in this context? Does that mean anything to either of you in terms of, is this a valid or frequently spouted conspiracy theory?
Because she gives the impression, right, of talking about somebody exactly. She seems to know who she's talking about, because she keeps also mentioning these guys are Marxists. So do you know, is she talking about anyone?
Because she's not talking about her friends. Any ideas?
I get a sense that she's trying to cash in on the fact that a lot of bad faith actors in political commentary, especially from the left, have loosely called everyone and anyone they don't like racist, white supremacist. And yeah, this definitely came from a lot of BLM types over the years, and I think she's trying to cash in on that. She knows that the well has been poisoned, so to speak, and now that she has to confront with the reality of anti-Semitism, that it's on the rise, and that some of her friends may be being accused of engaging with anti-Semitism, now she has to. This is just my opinion. This is just my suspicion. I think she's going out there and knows that her audience knows that the well is poisoned, and she's using that as a means to deflect away from the realities that anti-Semitism is rearing its ugly head at the moment, and it might be inconvenient for her.
Mark, what do you reckon? And especially to this comparison as well with BLM and the way she's tying everything to the Black community and their own issues as she sees it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm stunned. I almost don't know what to say. I sort of agree with Kirk that she's capitalizing on a known evil and attempting to associate something else with that evil, to hide her own personality and character defects, because everybody knows how corrupt BLM was. I can't imagine the Anti-Defamation League is necessarily the same thing as the BLM. BLM truly was seeking political power and to sow chaos in society, and they were lying. I mean, patently lying. And I don't see any similarity on the Jewish side of things. Even, I guess, lobbyists in Washington who are advocating for the Jewish cause. We're all have to be lobbyists in Washington because everybody has to have their finger in the Washington pie if you want to survive in the world today. It's a civil war of all against all in this kind of spoil system democracy we've created. But beyond that, I don't see them agitating by lying, by actually committing fraud, and I don't see them taking that money and doing criminal fraudulent things like BLM did. So yeah, I think she's using a known evil to hide her own character flaws.
Fair enough. Yeah, and one of the reasons why she probably argues against these so-called Jews hiding in DC trying to gather power comes from probably her opposition to some of the advertising that was shown during the Super Bowl. She's definitely against. In fact, she made the point that she hates the fact that NGOs and the Israel state spent money to do advertising in order to gather support for Israel, asking people to write to their representatives in order to create a momentum in order to support Israel. And she really didn't like this. It's like, first of all, it's not your money. If somebody decides to pay an American company to come up with advertising, what do you want to do about it? You choose to change channel if you don't want to watch it. But apart from that, and also she's definitely, as Kirk was mentioning, she's definitely against the use of foreign money in foreign aid and support. in abroad, especially for wars like support to Ukraine and Israel. I mean, she doesn't rattle on about the UN. She doesn't say, well, we should stop funding UNRWA because that ends up in being wasted and given to terrorists rather than even the people who need it. Is this kind of hate or desire to stop helping your allies or even taking a position in a war or in a conflict something that characterizes the Republican Party nowadays, Mark? Is this what we're going to be witnessing for the next 4 years, do you think?
I do. I think the new Republican nationalism is a form of isolationism. It's a form of mercantilism. And, I could look at, sending $135 billion to, I'm against foreign aid in general, as I think we all are. In principle, it's the wrong thing. But since we do it to support a country, a free country, or a country in attempting to be free in the face of authoritarian attacks, is worthy, and such a minuscule amount of our actual total debt that to focus on it as being a budgetary priority, that we hoard this $100 billion in the face of trillions upon trillions of dollars going out to an entitlement state, tells me that there's something else going on here. There's something else. There's a type of nationalism here with racist overtones that is scary and that we have to look out for. And it's not going to get better under Trump if Trump happens to win the election. He and Laura Trump, his daughter-in-law, are angling to. She's angling to co-chair the Republican National Committee. So this is going to become a part of the policy of the Republican National Committee from now on. So prepare for more of the same.
And how is the agenda of America first? I mean, if you don't help your allies, the people who effectively help you project your not only your power but also your values in other areas of the world. I mean, I see it as helping Ukraine. First of all, it would be fulfilling a promise that the West made to Ukraine when they gave up their weapons in the first place. So that's
nuclear weapons,
yeah. So that's a no-brainer to me. But helping Israel is surely in America's interest, isn't it? So how does this fit with the concept that America should be put first if you don't put your own interest first? That's just bizarre. Kirk, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, again, I think it's pretty revealing. We talked about funding all the foreign aid and all the money the billions we give to the United Nations, which is a very corrupt organization. I think I've been on 2 or 3 panels on this channel over the last few months talking about that. But that, not to mention the billions of dollars that the U.S. gives to countries in South America and countries like Mexico in effort to fight the war on drugs, which has been going on for decades. You don't see a lot of people getting too animated over that kind of stuff. I think the United States also gives a lot of foreign aid to countries like Egypt. And you don't see people getting animated about that. But when it comes to helping out Ukraine fight Russia, which is a real aggressor, which, and then, you see this with Candace, too, the way she applies her coverage to that whole. She's like laser focused on calling Zelensky a welfare queen and talking about the corruption in Ukraine, the history of corruption in the Ukraine government, which there's something to be talked about there. I'm not trying to downplay it. But she does not apply any of that scrutiny toward Vladimir Putin. Quite the contrary. I'm pretty sure I recall her tweeting out translations of Putin's speeches, saying stuff to the effect of, "Oh, well, he has an interesting perspective here. Why don't you read for yourself?" Instead of saying, this guy's kind of a monster for invading his neighbors and starting this quagmire of a conflict while dragging his economy, his country's economy, into the gutter and conscripting men in Russia against their will to the front lines. Again, if an American president did what if like Biden did something that Putin did, I imagine Candace Owens types would rightfully be going crazy over it. They'd be losing their minds, talking about how unjust it is that they're starting these wars that are not in self-defense and getting Americans killed and ruining our economy. But she seems just hyper laser focused on all the flaws with Zelensky. And I guess to your question, how is this America first? From what I can tell, when people talk about foreign policy in the name of America first, it's often America last, wrapped around a flag with a flag wrapped around it. It's all about bringing everyone back home and just closing shop and hunkering down and ignoring the rest of the world.
Yeah, for sure. And I think in that particular episode, she goes at Zelensky quite a bit, talking about it, showing his picture of him in Vogue, him appearing at the Grammys, and criticizing the fact that he's, attempting to raise money and keep support high for Ukraine in this war. But of course, there's no reference to Putin at all, and his efforts to lord it on the big stage and make sure that he can get the publicity that he needs for his side of the conflict, which is obviously in a completely different category. So yeah, it's definitely the case there. I think one of the things I've seen her do rather a lot is to endlessly compare things between different tribal groups. And that's what she does when she talks about Jews trying to scare each other. The Holocaust is back. She makes a comparison that, well, what if black people are trying to be scared that they're going to end up slaves again in chains? And it's always this sort of perceptual level visual imagery that she's trying to project of and claim that I've got two pictures that I've just pictured in your head that are identical. Therefore, these things are identical. That seems a particularly sloppy way of thinking. And you were talking about the arbitrary nature of some of her points, and when talking about her friends, she was talking about and the way her thinking works. That was revealed by this, I think, as well. She was talking about how her friends never talked about anti-Semitism through all the years, and they were leading quite good lives. Her conclusion, therefore, there was no anti-Semitism, and they certainly never experienced it. How do we work with people when there's this kind of logic seems to convince them? How do we cut through
this kind of logic? If anything, it's a lack of logic. It's just, again, entertaining the complete arbitrary and, talking about, tribalism. I think the fact that she tries to package in the left with atheism and narcissism, I'm not so much defending narcissism, but what does she mean by that? Does she mean that like all atheists are on the left? Does she think that atheism is an essential characteristic of the left? I don't think either of those things are really true. And it's the sense I get from it is that she is a tribalist. She's on the right, and she probably views atheism as a threat to her view of the world.
Yeah, I think the right has come out with Prager University did videos talking about how the Enlightenment was actually a terrible thing and how individualism is the reason we're in the state we're in right now. The right is rebelling against the Enlightenment just like the left is rebelling against the Enlightenment for their own reasons, and she's part and parcel of that. I mean, I don't know if she could process the idea that it may very well be that back then anti-Semitism wasn't the focus of a conversation between her and her friends. That doesn't mean that they didn't experience it. I never knew my friend Stephen Shub experienced terrible anti-Semitism until just recently. He grew up with it, and hearing some of the things that people said to him horrified me. But we're living in very unique times now where America used to represent, next to Israel, a truly safe haven for Jews escaping pogroms and organized mass murder against them. And now we're seeing not even an undercurrent of anti-Semitism anymore, outright anti-Semitism, where people are proudly saying Hitler should finish the job, and outright attacking people at schools, high schools even. There's a high school teacher in Queens who's been attacked by students until she felt she had to leave for her own safety. This is almost an epidemic. So I don't see how the times are comparable when anti-Semitism is rampant. I mean, on social media, just cue in a little bit to the feed, and you'll see people hating on Jews because they're saying "fuck Israel," "fuck the Jews." You know, people saying this, like not just one or two, but en masse. So it's not surprising that anti-Semitism is an accusation I hurl around now quite often. When you speak rationally to people and they continue to make the Jews the focus of every wrong that's ever happened in Western civilization, you can't help but think that there's something else besides facts and logic animating their hatred.
Yeah, absolutely. And the problem with people like Candice Owens is that she sees everything through the prism of tribalism. She just sees a collection of tribes who necessarily war with each other, and she's one of them. She belongs to a tribe, and she's definitely pushing her own view in order to, try and win the war against the others. And there's no one out there apart from objectivists who push the idea, actually, if you leave the individuals alone, able to trade with each other on a voluntary basis, all this tribalism falls away. All this hate will not be there, because if you don't like somebody, you just don't deal with them. You move away. You take your business, your friendship, your love to someone that you care, you value. But that's the direction we're going to. And what I find particularly weird, and what we perceive here from the side of the Atlantic, is how the party, which is supposed to push against collectivism and foster individualism, foster the American dream, the individual can outdo nature and create and do magnificent stuff, is actually pushing the other direction. How did this happen? Kirk, you're one of the most blocked people on X. How do you see this? Is that actually a prevalent mood, or is it just a bunch of individuals that shouts quite loud only?
I'm the most blocked person on X. The only person I know that's blocked me is Robert Reich. He blocked me a long time ago, but
I'd love to be blocked by him.
Well, now I'm jealous because you actually get to see a lot of his malarkey.
Not anymore. So maybe he did block me. I haven't seen it in a long time.
Hey, I'm sorry. What was your question? I'm sorry. I'm goofing around here. Yeah, just the other day I saw a video going around on Twitter. I guess this was from a protest outside of a Holocaust museum in Montreal of people saying "Death to Israel, death to the Jews," and it's I don't know how anyone can deny that anti-Semitism since October 7th has been on the rise. A lot of anti-Semites seem pretty comfortable these days. And I've even seen people joke like maybe Kanye West should have just waited a year to start opening his mouth, because he probably would have been a lot safer during these times.
Yeah, he'd probably get deals now instead of getting, brands ripped out from under him. He'd probably be getting all kinds of brands now.
He could just say, I'm just anti-Zionist, just
That's what he has to say.
Clean it up, like, yeah.
One of the things that Candice makes a big point of calling out is the emotionalist manipulation that she sees happening everywhere, but then falls within seconds into the same trap herself. I mean, the episode was even sponsored by an abortion charity or business, and she was within seconds of making this point talking about babies' heartbeats in the womb. And also when she was talking about things like Gaza, for example, she made a big point of describing feeling sad for children whose limbs are blown off and all this kind of thing, and describing the scenes within Gaza, and going on to make a very definite moral equivalence between people suffering in Israel and feeling sorry for their children, and people suffering in Gaza feeling sorry for their children, and American children. While we're at it, she was sorry for them as well. This lumping together of different things and going, they're all the same. are missing the bigger point. That's something you see all the time. You guys presumably have seen that as well in action. Mark,
I'm also just remembering that one time on Twitter, Candace Owens, speaking of her tribalism, she said if she were president, she would, and if anyone was caught burning the American flag, which I love. I don't like it when people burn the American flag, but she said that she would immediately strip them of their citizenship. And it's like, okay, I guess to her, national tribalism takes precedence over stuff like free speech.
Yeah.
That's so scary. That's so scary. She's a grifter. She's appealing to her constituency now. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think drawing a moral equivalency between the suffering of the children in Gaza and the suffering of the people in Israel is a gross moral error. And you could say lots of terrible things are happening to the Gazan people, and that's true, it is, but it's entirely the responsibility of Hamas and the Palestinian people. What I say when people say on social media, we need a ceasefire immediately, I'm saying, no, we need Hamas to surrender and the Palestinian people to renounce violence unconditionally. Now, the fact that they're not doing that should show every person who has a mind and a moral sense that their cause is more important to them than the suffering of their children. So that's what the continued death, if this is in fact really what's going on, because we get these numbers from the Hamas health ministry, it's impossible to know what's true and what isn't true with them. So much misinformation circulating around. But I will acknowledge that children are getting killed as collateral damage. They're not the deliberate targets, but they are getting killed. And that, to me, a parent who, first of all, puts their child in danger by celebrating an act of war on October 7th and October 8th, the way those people did, and then continuing to put their children in danger by not surrendering and or not rebelling against Hamas. They are the responsible parties for the predicament that their children are in. Every time I see a crying child or a dead child in a Palestinian person's arms, I say, you feel responsible for that. You should, because you made that happen. But look, I don't know, man. It seems like the culture at large can't make moral abstractions anymore. Their moral reasoning doesn't go beyond a picture or a soundbite.
Yeah.
And Candace I don't know that she's fallen into that, but she's certainly abusing it for her constituency.
Yeah, and unfortunately, she's not the only one. This old chestnut of talking about Palestinian children bombed, all this kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, well, thank you very much. It's never nice to see a human suffering, but why are they suffering? Because there is a war going on, a war which is not being started by Israel in the first place. Even 76 years ago, Israel was attacked just because it was declared a state. It was attacked by the very people who want to destroy every single Jew left on the planet. And that was after the Holocaust a few years before. So, nobody wants to see suffering, but the war means that civilization has broken down and you cannot reason with the other side anymore. They choose violence in order to settle their differences, and you have to respond with violence. Nobody wants to start violence. As objectivists, we know the evil of initiating violence, but when you need to defend yourself, you don't pull punches. You just go in to win, and that's why Mark's saying that Hamas has to surrender unconditionally. That's the only way we're gonna ever see peace in the area.
Now, Candice has a big platform, and she's reaching to quite a few people in the course of this. And one of the things that the producer Daniel's just mentioned is that she'd also done an interview apparently with Norman Finkelstein. Now, the simple fact that she has done an interview with Norman Finkelstein, what does that tell you?
Have you?
Yeah, I think I meant to mention that earlier. Like when she runs to the mot, like, oh, I just don't want tax dollars going to fund Israel, or I'm just, I'm just tired of seeing the images of suffering people in Gaza. I'm not against it, implying that she's not against Israel. She just wants the war to end. But then, yeah, she'll invite Norman Finkelstein on her show to talk about how horrible Israel is for 2 hours, essentially.
One day I should do a show in the cadence of Finkelstein. This is the way he talks when he's doing an interview with people. you feel like you want to pull your eyes out of your head and pull your ears off, because this is the cadence with which he says everything. You know, our show would go on for fucking 5 hours. Everybody spoke like Norman Finkelstein.
Yeah.
Such a horrible human being. These people. I'm my blood pressure's through the roof. I can't tell you.
Yeah, I mean, talk about sense of life, eh?
Yeah, I mean, going back to our friend Candice, I mean, she never actually, as you guys say, she never actually comes out with anything which is openly anti-Semitic. It's always kind of this kind of anti-Semitism where we see in the culture nowadays is never really out in the open. As you said, they often hide behind anti-Zionism, which is effectively the same thing. By saying you want to destroy Israel, what does that imply? Think 2 minutes about it. What does that mean? Destroying the Jews, doesn't it? I mean, so it doesn't take a genius, but this continuous drip. We shouldn't help Israel. More equivalencies. Yeah, by Gaza as well. And turning your back to Israel, it's effectively the equivalent of saying Israel should be destroyed, all the Jews should be killed. And this is the underlying anti-Semitism. It's not going to be open in the air. It's not going to be, spelled out like they often do during the stupid pro-Hamas marches that happens all the time here in London, unfortunately, as well. But the implication is always that if you don't come out and help the righteous, the moral country, which is attacked by a bunch of savages, what does it say about you?
Keep in mind, in Hamas's covenant, it talks about how jihad is its path and death for the sake of Allah is the loftiest of its wishes. You definitely don't get the sense that Hamas gives two craps about the civilians in Gaza that they are responsible for protecting. And then there was also an article last week by the Wall Street Journal titled "Hamas is losing every battle in Gaza. It still thinks it could win the war," where it reports that some of the Hamas commanders, part of their strategy is high civilian casualties because they know the civilian casualties will result in worldwide pressure on Israel to end the war. And they're hoping to win the war that way by getting the world to pressure Israel. And, just on this topic alone, I'd highly recommend the viewers and listeners of today's show check out Leonard Peikoff's lecture, "A Picture is Not an Argument," because it is very relevant to how people think about this conflict. And they just see the images on TV of civilians suffering in Gaza, and it's very perceptual level. That's all they need to demand, not demand Hamas surrender, because clearly they're counting on all of these horrible images to pressure Israel. No, they expect Israel to lay down their arms and surrender and tolerate genocidal maniacs living next door to them.
Yeah, I mean, let's not forget that the Arab conquest that took place, from roughly 700 something AD, well into the Middle Ages. Arabs were the most successful colonizers on the planet. And they lost that capacity to use brute force to overcome a foe. And so now they're using their civilian population as a war by other means. So they understand that since the 1960s and since Vietnam, war is also a propaganda game. And if you can demoralize the population that's defending itself, you can win the war by the defending country losing its morale. And you can do that by effectively using the dominant ethics today of altruism to make your case, to get pity, to get mercy from other nations. And that's what they're doing now. They're winning the war of public relations by posting pictures of Palestinian children, sometimes even fake. Some of it's fake, but just to pull the heartstrings of people who feel guilty and who don't feel like a more powerful foe should assert itself fully against one that's weaker.
Yeah. And making themselves the victim is certainly something they've learned very well. That's why the UN aid and UNRWA is been aiding Hamas so effectively. Well, guys, thank you very much. We've run out of time for today. Kirk, you mentioned the picture not an argument. that can be found on YouTube with a very quick search. But where can the audience find more about you?
Just search my name, Kirk Wilcox on YouTube. And yeah, I mean, have videos about this topic. Put up a video a couple years ago where I was reacting to Candice Owens and her lame defense of Kanye West. So yeah, these are topics that I've covered in the past. So check me out. Also check me out on Elon Musk's website, formerly known as Twitter, at Kirk Wilcox. Thank you.
And Mark, same question to you. Where can people best find you?
Mark R. Pellegrino on X. I do a lot of argument there. So if you want to get into the fray, wade in, you're welcome. I'm on Patreon as well. And also, I just posted a new reality check that's about to be the highest viewed reality check that I've posted so far on proportional responses. Check it out. If you have any moral questions about what Israel is doing, look at that video. Hopefully it'll give you some encouragement to stick to the side that is fighting for liberty.
Absolutely. And of course, all of those descriptions are all in the description down below. You'll find all of those links to all of your sites. So great. Thank you very much, guys. Now, I've got a couple of things to mention coming up. I think tomorrow's TDO, tomorrow's Daily Objective, is going to be on Hamas Lies Exposed, how they inflate the Gaza death toll. So please check that out. That'll be out tomorrow. The time will be 5:30 UK time. If you want to turn that into your local clock, please go ahead. And of course, we've got a Briefly Objective, just like the one you saw in the previous Daily Objective that was banned on TikTok. There's another Briefly Objective video coming up in just a couple of minutes on the Briefly Objective channel. And that one is called The Left on the Jewish Question. And that one's voiced by Yaron Brook. So please check that out on the Briefly Objective. And all of us in some combo or another, we'll see you on the next reality show. So please join us then. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.